Hey guys, welcome to the Asian Hustle Network podcast. My name is Brian.
And my name is Maggie.
And we interview Asian entrepreneurs around the world to amplify their voices and empower Asians to pursue their dreams and goals.
We believe that each person has a message and a unique story from their entrepreneurial journey that they can share with all of us. Hi everyone, welcome to the Asian Hustle Network podcast. My name is Maggie.
My name is Brian.
And today we have a very special guest with us. His name is Hanson Li, and he is the founder and managing partner of Salt Partners Group, which is a development and investment company focused on the food and beverage industry. And their portfolio includes the Crenn Dining Group, which includes Atelier Crenn, Petit Crenn, Bar Crenn, as well as Humphry Slocombe Ice Cream, LocoL, Saison, High Proof, and Brown Sugar Kitchen. Hanson, welcome to the show.
Such a
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah. Well, we would love to jump right ahead, and we'd love to know, how was your upbringing like, and what kind of family did you grow up in? Where were you born? And what was your upbringing like?
Sure. No, thank you for having me, Maggie and Ryan. I was born in Hong Kong, and the Lee side of my family, my dad's side of the family, has been in Hong Kong for many generations. And my mom was born in China, and then her and her family escaped from China during the Cultural Revolutions in the 50s, and landed in Hong Kong. So, I was born in, a small family in Hong Kong, and then when I went to local schools, and when I was 9 years old, my immediate family moved to Taiwan for a job opportunity for my dad. So we lived in Taiwan for 3 years, and so I speak Mandarin as well as Cantonese. I thank the television station in Taiwan for teaching me really good Mandarin. And then age 12, we moved to the U.S. for the first time. So my dad worked for Kodak for 30 years, and now, unfortunately, a defunct American company. But Kodak transferred my family over to the U.S., and so we moved to the U.S. for the first time when I was 12 years old. I still remember vividly. It was December. I was in the middle of middle school. I've been only in Asia, right, up till when I was age 12. I still remember flying into Detroit. The plane landed, and it was like 4 p.m., and it was dark. What the hell's going on? Why is it dark already? It's only 4 p.m. And then Rochester, New York is near, it's on Lake Ontario across from Toronto. So it's cold. So we landed and we got to Rochester. I've never experienced cold. Never seen snow, actually. So it was my first time seeing snow. And so I went to a local middle school, but just for 1 year. And then we left and we moved to Malaysia.
Wow.
And so every time we moved, it was halfway across the world, from Taiwan to New York to Malaysia. And Malaysia was a fun time kind of being there. I was, last year of middle school, first 2 years of high school, I went to international school, which is an interesting setting. The kids there, like me, was part of an expat family, a lot of embassy kids as well. I guess it's a sign of times how things have changed. One of my best friends' dad worked at the American Embassy, and I used to go to the American Embassy to play tennis with her.
Wow.
Like, I'm not an American citizen, right? But I was able to just walk into to the compounds, if you will. I don't think we can do that now anymore. And then after 2.5 years in Malaysia, we moved back to New York again, where I finished high school. And I've been in the U.S. ever since. So in terms of, kind of before college, right, it was mostly in Asia with a couple of years in the U.S., kind of back and forth. So I am very Asian in that I grew up in Asia. I'm Chinese. But, most of my adult life, I've been in the U.S.
Wow. That's absolutely amazing. I'm just kind of curious too, like, what was your identity like switching back and forth so frequently? How did that affect you, making new friends, learning new cultures, assimilating to American culture, essentially?
Yeah, I think, I'm sure it was hard in the moment. But I think coming out of it is I feel very comfortable with a lot of different situations and walking into a room, and because I think I had to face that, moving from Asia to not even a big city in America, right, into a small city in America. And, you know, my English wasn't terribly good when I came here to the US. And so I think it forced me to, you know, to really adapt and to be fluid about, you know, going from, you know, at the suburb of a small city in America, right, and then going and moving to an international high school in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. I think that has helped me along the way, right, in terms of being able to relate to all sorts of people fairly easily, keeping my mind open, right, with a lot of different perspectives. And I think, you know, having been able to grow up in all these different countries, you know, really allowed me to see just different personalities, different nationalities, right, and the commonality of it all. And I think it's really helped, right, in terms of my career and being open to things.
That's really cool, and it's really unique too. I think that some of these experiences are only unique to yourself. You know, we're sitting here trying to imagine, like, what was it like growing up in Stanford, you know? We're kind of curious too, like, what was your parents' emphasis in education? Because obviously you're extremely smart. You know, you went to Stanford for undergrad, got your master's there, and you got an MBA all at Stanford, you know? What was the emphasis in education in your family like?
Yeah, and on top of that, you know, what were your parents doing, and did they have like a set plan for you? Like, did they want you to go through a certain route?
No, my parents were very laissez-faire, right? In that way, they were very American, right? And not very typically, you know, Chinese. You know, my dad was worked for an American corporation for, you know, most of his career. My mom was a high school teacher in Hong Kong, and then after we left Hong Kong, you know, she was a stay-at-home mom. You know, I think I never had any pressure in terms of being a certain career. The only thing that I think, the only time my father suggested something to me was like, you should look into like material science. Right, this was like in the early '90s, right? Like semiconductors and you know, I never had an interest in, you know, so that quickly passed, right? Now I ended up marrying a material science engineer. So that's kind of funny how it goes around. And you know, I mean, you know, economics certainly was important, right? But it was never pressured,
right?
And you know, they didn't have a prescribed, you know, you need to go to this college. It was never say you have to go to medical school or, you know, be a professional. So they were very supportive, right? And without, you know, they supported without giving specifics.
Right.
And so, yeah, so I have two kids now, a 12-year-old and an 11-year-old. And, you know, I try to be the same to them, right? In terms of guiding, right? But without telling them, right? Giving them the end.
Yeah. I mean, we absolutely love that too, that your parents are so, you know, laissez-faire about things. I can honestly say my parents were too. They just like, they told me, just do what makes you happy as long as you can feed yourself. that was the minimum criteria for my parents. You know? It's good because it really, you know, I think us like not having to be pressured into a certain mode or a certain feel really gave us a lot of creativity to like become the person that we should become. You know? And that kind of links back to a lot of issues with Asian students, like in the Western culture, who are facing mental health because they have not been able to express themselves freely. And it's really great that you know, your parents are really laissez-faire about raising you. And we want to dive deeper into like more. We want to learn more about salt. You know, like we understood that it took you about 10 years before you got started. You know, and this is something that you formulated back while you were at Stanford. You're like, hey, what if we work together with creatives and restaurant owners to really blow their business up? We think that's a fantastic idea, by the way. Like, contrary to all the naysayers, we're super glad you locked up all of them. and we really appreciate why did you pick the name Salt as well,
Sure. So I started Salt in 2014 after really thinking about kind of what I want to do for the rest of my career, right? And I started with writing a business plan. I knew I wanted to do something in food, where my passion lies. And the name of the name of Salt, right, really matched in terms of kind of my starting hypothesis, right, of the business I want to build. Salt, we're the business partner to a bunch of great chefs and bartenders and brands in the food space. And, it was a very conscientious choice on the word salt, right? In that salt is a very important ingredient in cooking, as we all know. A great piece of steak doesn't taste good without salt, but it's never named as an ingredient, right, on a menu. And that's how we see our role so far with working with our portfolio companies, is that we are in the background, making sure that the business runs well, that the business is sustainable, is successful. We plan, we strategize, and to build, a business that requires both the creative part and also the sustainable business part. And so that's what we do as Salt. And it also happens that I love the Chinese character for salt, which I think is a beautiful word and is our logo. And yeah, so there's a little bit of the history of how, Salt came to be.
Yeah, we love that, the history too. And we love the support mindset that you guys have that you had moving forward with this company. I mean, that's the exact same way that how we feel about Asian Hustle Network, You guys can be salt, well, we're happy to be the sugar.
Oh, very much so, right? And, as I've now done this for 5 years, right? And, we have some great partnerships with like Chef Petit Crenn, with the ice cream brand Humphry Slocombe. And, I think, I've been thinking about kind of the next 5 years, right? In terms of where we go as Salt. And over the last 5 years, we've opened, a dozen restaurants and have been involved with.
So amazing.
With, ice cream shop all the way to Michelin 3-star restaurants.
Yeah.
And so we know a lot, right? As our team have been involved with the operations and opening of these restaurants, we know a lot now. And, we're in the plans of, trying to figure out something to do on our own and creating our own concepts. So yeah, to be seen in terms of how, and this pandemic is, looking back at my career, right? I was in tech during the internet bubble. I was in finance in 2009. And now I'm in the restaurant business, right, in COVID. So there's been 3 black swans in my career already. And so I'm going to take this opportunity to, create something new as well. Nothing like a little pandemic to start a new company.
Yeah.
And that's, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, well, we love that mindset, and that's really all it takes to become successful in this pandemic. And I read this article and it talked about the difference between entrepreneurs and CEOs in this pandemic and the mindset behind those two different entrepreneurs. And you really have to have a positive mindset. CEOs and entrepreneurs who keep using terms like buy and opportunity and, positivity, those are the ones who do really well, as opposed to, entrepreneurs who use like panic or, Trump or something like that. Those are really key differences. And, we know that you were part of Capital One, and I would love to know how you were able to make that transition from Capital One to going into the food and beverage industry. And, Brian and I, we come across a lot of people who are in the food and beverage industry, and we hear a lot about how, it's a really hard industry to get into. The profit margin is very slim, and you really have to do things accurately and correctly if you want to succeed in the restaurant industry. And from your perspective, how were you able to, get into the food and beverage industry? And how did you know that you wanted to learn more about it?
Sure. I joined Capital One right after college and worked there for almost 4 years. That's my first job out of college. And I loved it. I met my wife there. I still have lifelong friends from Capital One, and I have very fond memories of the place. And then I went into, after Capital One, I jumped into a startup, right? This was 1999, 2000. So during the internet bubble days. And didn't know, it was my first startup, didn't know anything, honestly. Like, it was just, looking back, like I was really dumb about what we're trying to build. The idea was great. We had a lot of execution problems. And then after that startup, we sold part of it. And I went to business school. And this was during, the recession, right? 2001, 2002.
Yeah.
And it was during that business school time where, I had time to both, obviously business school is great in terms of being exposed to a lot of different things and also having time, right, to really think and reflect. A lot of conversation with other people going through the same thing, right? The dialogues you end up having. And this is when SALT was really born, right? The idea of SALT. And now I've always loved cooking. I love feeding people, the act of feeding people. Now I was never, I never worked in a real kitchen. At best I was a barista for a couple of weeks, at a coffee place that I opened. But I've always loved the immediate gratification that a good restaurant, bar, cafe can give to people, right? And, is a way to deliver happiness. It sounds very frou-frou in ways, but, I get a big kick out of walking into any of my restaurants, right? And there are dozens and dozens of people who are just a little bit happier, right? Because of what we're doing. And that's very fulfilling. And I think that's a common theme, right? If you talk to a lot of people in the food industry, right? It is that little bit, is the hospitality that you can give and the happiness that you can create that really makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah.
You mentioned in terms of the food business being a hard business. It certainly is. I'm not, I live and breathe it every day. But I would say that everything is difficult.
Yeah.
Like if it's not, then it becomes difficult as more people start doing it, right? So I would say that with the restaurant business, there are a lot of inherent and unique challenges in terms of running a restaurant and the food business. I like to remind myself that, okay, first rule is actually, making sure that we don't get people sick. Obviously, delivering hospitality, we rely a lot on staff, right, to deliver that hospitality and the food. So there's a lot of people management challenges and opportunities. But ultimately, in terms of, the idea that food is more harder than other industry, or the margin is thinner than other industry, I would say that everything is hard. But everything could be successful also. I'm sure just back and forth, right, between the three of us, we can name dozens and dozens of restaurants that are successful. They don't have to be all losing money or close within the first year. In terms of your question, Maggie, of how I got into the food business, I just did, which is not a very satisfying answer. I understand.
Fell into it.
Again, I didn't start SALT until, I was almost 40 years old, right? So after working for many years, and after working in finance for 10 years after business school, and before business school, I was in tech. So, I never worked for a food company or a restaurant company. So there's no, I couldn't draw, A, B, C, D, E for you in terms of how I got into food. Now, although I do remind you, right, I was very, specific and conscientious, right, in terms of developing my own business plan of here's why I bring certain advantages or different perspective to have a chance to be successful, right, in the food business. Now I'm not working in the kitchen. I'm not working, as a manager in the restaurant, right? I'm still the business guy, right? So I'm still using what I am really good at, right? I'm good at investing. I'm good at looking at strategy. I'm good at, working with people. And the three things that I just mentioned could be for food, could be for movies, could be for a lot of different things, right? And I think this is where where you find where your skills and how it, is intersects with your passion.
Mm-hmm.
And I was lucky, right, that I know my passion.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't, right? And that's part of the kind of ongoing challenge, right? Of, finding what you're passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then how do you create that opportunity for it to be a sustainable career?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I was lucky, right, that I found that. Now, I also would say that, I waited a while.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
The exact same business plan 10 years prior may not be as successful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So also knowing a little bit about yourself, right, in terms of when to take that entrepreneurial risk.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, it's not necessary that an entrepreneur needs to be in their 20s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Arguably, entrepreneurs in their 40s should do better, right? Because they know more. They've seen more.
Yeah, we're watching you, and obviously you're a huge role model to us. You have a really great reputation around the Bay as well. I'm extremely happy to even talk to you and learn from you right now. Yeah, it's your mindset that really appeals to us right now. It's like, obviously you're facing a lot of different challenges right now, and the fact is, you're seeing these things as opportunities to do more. To reinvent yourself. It's actually very refreshing to hear something like that.
Yeah, I still remember when COVID hit, right, in mid-March. Now, because I have family in Hong Kong, right, so I knew it was coming, right, and even though you can see it coming, you didn't anticipate that to be like this shock, right, of it being here. And the last 2 weeks of March, right, was a lot of scrambling about just, okay. I remember making an analogy to a friend. Was like someone set my house on fire, and the fire department is not coming, right? Because someone asked me to close the restaurant, I have to close it, and there was no help, right? There's no, okay, we'll do this for you, right? There's nothing afterwards.
Exactly.
So it was just a lot of scrambling, right, at that time. And I was very conscientious, right, in terms of working with my team and our restaurants, right, to not think about going back to normal. I think is a fool's errand in terms of wanting to go back to what it was before.
Right.
Because that mindset, right, requires you to look ahead of what the new is going to be, right, and the new normal.
Right.
And you can either hope for return to back to normal, or you can define the new normal, right? Being more proactive about creating that future. And now it sounds great. I am optimistic and believe in it, and it's still really hard, right? Because of so much unknown in the future. And so, I'm still very optimistic that, people will still need to eat. Restaurants is still an important place, right, for all of us, right, for cultural reasons, for us Asians, or just, in terms of as a social enterprise. But how it look like, I don't know. But, I'm hopefully in a position, right, to create some of that future.
Yeah. And speaking of COVID-19 in the restaurant industry, there's obviously a lot of uncertainty right now. And, California, or at least the Bay Area, had recently announced that they were closing all of outdoor dining again, now that we're in mid-July. And I'm just curious, there's a lot of culture that goes within, eating out. You enter into a restaurant and you see a lot of the heritage and the culture that goes on. You get a glimpse of what the owner is trying to portray in their dishes, in their decor, in their interior, everything in the restaurant. And I'm curious, from your perspective, how can restaurant owners maintain that culture now that, we're in COVID-19, we're going back into quarantine? And we had a podcast recording with Andrew Chow Boba Guys recently. And, he mentioned that, yes, he's going to have to do like a drive-by for Boba Guys where people just like pick up boba for like 10 seconds and they go. But there's also that part where it's really sad because, you spend so much time putting so much, work into building the interior and portraying that culture and that heritage to your customers, but you aren't able to do that anymore. And so I would love to learn from you, how are restaurant owners supposed to be able to maintain that culture within their restaurants now?
It's funny, I mean, it's a great question, right? Because I was just, I was at Bar Crenn today, one of my restaurants, right? And it's a beautiful restaurant, right? And it makes me sad, right? That you too can't go there now, right? And I don't know when you can go to Bar Crenn. And this goes back to kind of looking, wishing you can go back there, right? In terms of like back to normal, right? And the challenge, right, is, okay, how do I still deliver what I want to deliver, right? Is a feeling, right, of Bar Crenn or Humphry Slocombe Ice Cream,
right?
Or, for Andrew and Ben, for Boba guys, right? How do I still deliver that brand hospitality and that feeling to you without you being physically in there?
Right.
Now, restaurants is unique in that, yes, you have to, more often than not, you have to be in a space to eat that food, right? And within that food is to what you mentioned, Maggie, which is, the environment, right? The interior design is a immersive experience, right? The best dining experience is, includes that element.
Right.
But I would also suggest, right, the best eating experience oftentimes doesn't require any of that, right? It requires your dining companion, right? Yeah. You guys have been in restaurants where you just get lost in conversation, or you're in the round table, right? You don't see all the stuff, right? But you still have a great time. You still have a fond memory, right, of eating at that place.
Right.
And this is another example, right? There are plenty of products, the glasses you're wearing, right, or the shirt you're wearing. You're buying it, right, as a brand, and then that brand is making a promise to you without you having, walk into a Albert store, right, or that store. But somehow you still have that familiarity, right, and that closeness to that brand, even though you might not have never been into that store.
Yeah.
Or talk to the owner of that brand.
Right.
So restaurant is a really weird animal, right? When I talk about it that way, where like, yeah, you equate Boba guys with Andrew and Ben, right? But, equivalently, right, find a fashion brand, right? Would you talk about those founders, right? The way that you might think about with, Dominic Crenn and the restaurant group, right? Or, with, Andrew and Ben, right, for Boba guys. It's a really long answer to your question, Maggie, which is that I almost kind of think about, the investment of what we built, right? And yes, there'll be a day when restaurants will open again and you can come to Bar Crenn, right? Or come to Horsefeather and come to any one of my restaurants. But in the meantime, right, the challenge ahead, right, and the opportunity ahead, right, is how do I still deliver great product, great food to you without you being physically in the space? How do I still have a relationship with you?
Right.
Without you being in the space. And there are a lot of great restaurants in the Bay Area who really excel, right, in the takeout food, right, that they've developed over the last 3-4 months.
Right.
And it's amazing, right, when world-class chefs is a little more thoughtful about, okay, this dish should go into this box, and I'm going to cook it this way because it will travel better.
Right. Yeah.
Really basic stuff. But it turns out great. I mean, there's so much great takeout opportunities right now. So anyhow, it is sad. I won't lie, right? In terms of all the efforts that we put into creating that immersive experience. But at the same time, I think there's still a way for us to build that customer brand relationship, right, without the physical space.
Yeah. And I do think like this entire conversation, there's really, really good points, I think that just having the right timing of market fit too. I mean, like you said before, you waited 10 years before you execute this idea. I just want to have our listeners hear that it's never too late. You have an idea that you're kind of thinking about, sit on it for a little bit until you're ready. It's nothing worse about executing a great idea during the wrong time.
Yeah. And so I think that's, I think reading, different entrepreneur books, right, and talking to a lot of entrepreneurs, right. I've also, listened to the How I Built This podcast, right.
This is a great podcast.
There's no path, right, to entrepreneurship.
It isn't.
There's no playbook. I think there are some probably common themes about the characteristics of the people involved. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people just like you did, right, in terms of asking how I got into food, right? And I've tried to come up with a more elegant answer, more thoughtful answer. But the reality is that no, there's actually no why of what I did before that would naturally lead me to or prepare me for to go into the food business.
That's just how life usually is, Sometimes it comes unexpectedly, but the fact that you've been thinking about food, it means that it's an ongoing passion.
It is. It's certainly an ongoing passion, right? And I've been involved with restaurants, right, as a side hustle, right, before starting Salt Partners. So I have a little bit of understanding, right, in terms of I wasn't completely blind about getting into the restaurant business. And again, I think a lot of what I learned through my career of managing people, looking at strategy, making database decisions, all those things are relevant, right? No matter what industry you're in, if you're trying to build a good business.
Yeah, I think you did a really good thing too, because essentially you're using your strength to its full potential, and you're partying up with people that fit your passion. That's something that perhaps you're lacking. Like you don't have the ability to cook. You don't know the in and outs of seasoning and restaurant stuff, but you know the business side of things. And because you're so comfortable with that side, and you still want to pursue your passion, you made it work. Some people
still trying to make it work. Still trying to make it work.
Yeah.
I was talking to someone who was graduating from business school this year. It was like March or April, and he was interested to get into the food business, right? And middle of April, I was a beat down man, and I told him he at that time he knew as much about the food business as I do, right? Because everything that I've known is just different. And kind of have to relearn everything. But this is also where, you have a lot of reps, right? You've seen the movie, you've seen patterns before. And, hopefully, I have seen the patterns, right, that we can, draw a new path out of this.
Yeah,
definitely.
And, going back to what you originally said, you having no experience in the restaurant industry, I think that goes for a lot of Asian parents as well. When they hear of their children wanting to go into a certain industry, like, for example, if I wanted to tell my parents, I want to go into a restaurant, go into the restaurant industry, they would tell me, why? Like, you aren't a professional chef, you know nothing about, running a restaurant. Like, why would you want to do that? Or let's say I want to do, go into apparel. They would say, oh, can you even make money that way? Like, they would think you're selling clothes out of the fashion district or something, right? But I think everything that you said was very accurate. As long as you have a good business acumen, as long as you are strategic, as long as you're innovative, you can succeed and do really well in any industry, regardless of what it is, as long as you are smart about it and you are very strategic. And so I would love to know, what would be your advice to an aspiring entrepreneur who is trying to get into the restaurant industry, whether that be, opening a restaurant or purchasing a restaurant or going into investing into restaurants?
Just be very thoughtful, I think. For me is the thought. I like using the word thoughtful because then it is knowing the risk that you're getting into,
right?
And being real about it.
Yeah.
And yes, have optimism and hopefulness. I think that's required to be an entrepreneur. But I think also, right, the other side of the same coin, right, is to be realistic, right, and to be calculating is too strong of a word, right? But good entrepreneurs know when to fold, right? They know when to, pivot, change. And I think that for anyone who's going into the restaurant business, right, is a willingness, right, to have that kind of pinging, going back and forth on a river. This is never strict in terms of the path.
Mm-hmm.
The restaurant industry is a very people-intensive industry.
Mm-hmm.
So, if one is, if you want to open a restaurant or buy a restaurant, you have to be prepared, right, to really like working with people, right, and be honest with yourself, right, that you actually like working with people.
We tell ourselves Asian Hustle Network all the time.
And working, with people in a office setting, right, it's very different, right, in terms of working in an environment where, like, all right, we need to produce something like right this minute, right? There's no emails back and forth, right? You have to get that dish out. You have to serve the customer that is standing in front of you. And that creates a lot of stress and angst.
Mm-hmm.
And I think unless you really work in a restaurant setting or settings like that, right, you don't know how intense it could be,
mm-hmm.
right? It's like having working with your managers or your employees is similar to having like many different personal relationships, right? Not exactly in terms of like a boyfriend girlfriend relationship, right? But it is intense, right? You're making a lot of decisions together all the time. And so I would suggest anyone who want to get into the restaurant business, right, like ask deep in yourself, right? Is how do I feel about working with a lot of different people very intensely all day long?
Right.
Everything else in terms of the profit margin and all that, back to my point earlier, right, is everything is kind of hard. Everything requires work, right? There's no easy pot of gold under the rainbow. And in restaurant, it's just a people-intensive business. You don't get your weekends, you don't get your nights, you don't get your holidays, right? So it's just also eyes wide open, right? That's going to be part of your life.
Yeah.
But it is rewarding, right? That little dose of happiness I mentioned, right? In terms of seeing your customers happy.
Right.
Love that.
Yeah. Love it. That's very sound advice. And I think that goes for every entrepreneur in any industry that, as long as you have grit and, you have that determination, you can make it.
Yeah. And the self-awareness, right? Again, just the self-awareness that, and grit comes in many different forms, right? Like an engineering, coding through the night, right? It's a different type of grit than dealing with like 30 screaming customers. Right? It's the same type of endurance, right? Right. But it's very different, right? Which type do you want, right? And that you can bear with, right? So having that self-awareness, I think, is very important, right? In terms of before you jump into either a restaurant or any other entrepreneurial endeavor.
Yeah.
It is actually like to know enough that is actually what I'm willing to endure.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Hanson. We are at the top of the hour, but I would love to have you tell our listeners where we can find more about you and your company, Salt.
Sure. I actually have a website. It took me a while to create one. So on my website, saltpg.com, you can find kind of all of our portfolio companies. Thank you so much, Maggie and Brian. You guys are doing great work at AHN. I love reading. I'm so appreciative of all the people, like everyone telling their story. Like there's so many good writers about kind of telling their own story. It's amazing, right? In terms of just the interesting story, but also how well thought out and written they are. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Hanson.
Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe to the show.
We would like to get to the top 10 on iTunes, so be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We release an episode every single Wednesday, so stay tuned.
Thank you guys so much.